The city lights shimmered, reflecting off the polished chrome of the arriving luxury vehicles that glided down the street. Each car, a silent testament to wealth, deposited its impeccably dressed occupants at the entrance of the Diamond Club. The building itself was a beacon of exclusivity, its facade a mosaic of tempered glass and polished steel, catching the ambient glow and scattering it in 1,000 tiny, dazzling refractions. A faint, rhythmic bass line pulsed from within, a subtle invitation to the world of high-stakes glamour and curated pleasure. Even from the street, the scent of expensive perfume and the faint tang of aged whiskey seemed to waft through the air, promising a night of indulgence. At the velvet rope, a figure stood sentinel. Leo. His frame was a formidable monument of muscle, encased in a tailored obsidian suit that seemed to absorb every stray beam of light. His bald head gleamed under the discreetly placed uplights, and a permanent, watchful frown creased his brow. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned each approaching face, categorizing, judging, and ultimately deciding. He was the gatekeeper, the arbiter of who was worthy of crossing the threshold into the diamond's glittering interior. Tonight, like every night, he held court, a silent, powerful monarch of the curb. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up, its tinted windows offering only tantalizing glimpses of its passengers. When the chauffeur opened the door, a cascade of laughter spilled out, followed by a young woman in a dress that glittered like a spilled constellation, her arm linked with a man whose watch alone could likely fund a small nation. Leo offered a curt nod, pulling the velvet rope aside with a practiced flick of his wrist. He watched them disappear into the shimmering vestibule, a flicker of something akin to pride in his stern gaze. This was the caliber of clientele he protected. This was the standard he upheld. The line behind the rope grew steadily, a serpentine queue of hopefuls, each vying for a chance to be deemed acceptable. Leo enjoyed the power, the unspoken deference in their eyes. He'd seen it all, the desperate pleas, the subtle bribes, the feigned nonchalance. He rarely wavered. His job wasn't just about physical security, it was about maintaining the club's mystique, ensuring that only the right kind of person experienced its inner sanctum. A vintage Jaguar, a deep forest green, purred to a stop a little further down the curb than the others. It was an older model, impeccably maintained, but subtly out of place amongst the parade of contemporary supercars. From its driver's seat emerged a man of advanced years. His suit, though perfectly pressed and clearly of fine material, was a classic cut, lacking the aggressive modernity of the younger patrons. His silver hair was neatly combed, and a quiet dignity radiated from his posture. He approached the rope with an unhurried grace, his gaze steady, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Leo's eyes narrowed. He took in the man's polished but slightly worn leather shoes, the absence of flashy jewelry, the lack of an accompanying entourage. He looked ordinary. Too ordinary for the Diamond Club. Leo squared his shoulders, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Good evening," the man said, his voice a low, melodic rumble, entirely devoid of the usual nervousness or eager politeness Leo was accustomed to. "I believe I have an appointment." Leo remained impassive, his expression unyielding. "Name?" he grunted, his voice a low growl, accustomed to extracting information rather than requesting it. "Michael," the man replied simply, still with that faint, pleasant smile. "Michael Thorne." Leo's mind raced through the mental Rolodex of VIPs, regulars, and booked tables. The name didn't ring a bell, no reservation under Thorne for tonight. He glanced at the man's unpretentious demeanor, contrasting it sharply with the glittering crowd behind him. He wasn't loud or flashy or even particularly assertive. He just stood there. Leo felt a familiar prickle of irritation. This wasn't the kind of person who just showed up with an appointment. "I don't have a Michael Thorne on my list," Leo stated, his voice flat, edged with a finality that brooked no argument. He let his gaze drift pointedly over the man's classic suit, lingering a moment too long on its understated elegance. The man's smile didn't falter, though his eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something unreadable, a deep, silent understanding. He merely nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "I see," he murmured, his voice still gentle. He turned, without protest, without a single argument, and walked back towards his vintage Jaguar. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away, disappearing into the city night as quietly as he had arrived. Leo watched him go, a sense of smug satisfaction settling over him. Another potential disruption handled, another testament to his discerning eye. He pulled the velvet rope back into place with a definitive snap, ready for the next wave of hopefuls. Minutes later, a black limousine, longer and more imposing than any other that had arrived, screeched to a halt, its tires protesting faintly. The driver, his face pale, practically leapt out to open the door. From within burst a man in an expensive, slightly rumpled suit, his face flushed with a furious urgency. It was Julian Vance, the owner of the Diamond Club, a man rarely seen outside its hallowed walls and never in such a state of disarray. "Leo," Vance barked, his voice raw with barely contained rage, his eyes blazing. "Did you see an older gentleman, silver hair, driving a green Jaguar?" Leo straightened, a sudden knot forming in his stomach. Vance's fury was palpable, a tangible force radiating off him. "Yes, Mr. Vance," he replied, a touch of trepidation entering his tone. "He said his name was Michael Thorne. I didn't have him on the list, so I turned him away." Vance's face contorted, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. He slammed his palm against the limousine's polished hood, the metallic thud echoing in the sudden silence. "You turned him away?" he hissed, each word laced with venom. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "Leo, that wasn't just Michael Thorne. That was Mr. Thorne. The Michael Thorne. He owns the building. He founded this club. He owns me." Vance's voice dropped to a thunderous whisper. "He was coming to oversee the quarterly review. He was coming to fire me." He stared at Leo, his expression a chilling mixture of disbelief and utter despair. "And you absolute imbecile, just sent him packing." A humble approach, the crisp night air, usually invigorating, cut a sharp edge against Mr. Silas's seasoned features. He drew his simple dark wool jacket tighter, its fabric softened by countless wears, a testament to utility over trend. A stark contrast to the sleek coats and shimmering wraps that flowed past. His attire spoke of enduring comfort, not fleeting statement. His sturdy, well-maintained shoes made no sound on the polished granite path leading to the Diamond Club. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, a rhythm almost alien amid the exclusive district's frenetic pulse. The club itself dominated the skyline, a dazzling edifice of glass and chrome, its facade ablaze under a precisely orchestrated light show. Valet attendants, indistinguishable in their immaculate uniforms, navigated luxury vehicles with mechanical precision, the cars purring with subdued power. Occasional stabs of bright laughter cut through the low thrum of bass from within, mingling with the excited murmur of those queued for entry. Mr. Silas's gaze swept over the scene, absorbing the spectacle with unhurried curiosity. His eyes, though webbed with fine lines, possessed remarkable clarity and warmth, taking in every detail without judgment. He noted the sparkle of expensive adornments, the assured swagger of young men, the carefully cultivated nonchalance of women. He observed the subtle choreography of aspiration and display, the unspoken tenets of this glittering realm. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a private amusement devoid of malice. As he neared the entrance, a formidable figure detached himself from the shadows beside the velvet rope. This was Leo, the club's gatekeeper, a man whose imposing physique was matched only by the imperious set of his jaw. Tonight, however, Leo's customary air of unflappable authority was subtly frayed. A tense energy vibrated beneath his polished exterior, a barely contained anxiety manifesting in the slight clenching of his fists and eyes that darted restlessly, as if anticipating an unwelcome arrival. He'd received a call moments ago, a curt, furious blast from a number he'd been explicitly ordered to always answer. A voice, tight with barely suppressed rage, had delivered a single chilling sentence. "You turned him away, Leo. You turned away the founder." The words echoed in Leo's mind, a death knell to his career, perhaps even to more. He'd mentally replayed every face from the past hour, every person he'd denied entry. There had been a few, of course, the usual hopefuls without proper attire, the overly eager tourists, the drunkards, but no one who fit the description of someone so profoundly important. He'd been meticulous, hadn't he? Or had his usual confidence blinded him? His gaze fell upon Mr. Silas, now just a few paces from the velvet rope. Leo's shoulders, previously hunched with apprehension, straightened almost imperceptibly. Here, at least, was a familiar type, a distraction, someone whose rejection would be straightforward. The man's simple jacket, faded but clean, stood in stark contrast to the designer labels adorning the club's clientele. His unhurried pace, the absence of any overt desire to impress, merely confirmed Leo's immediate assessment. No high roller, no VIP. Leo's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening into its customary mask of detached scrutiny. He noted the quiet dignity emanating from Mr. Silas, a dignity that, in Leo's world, often disguised a lack of means. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped Leo's lips. Another one. Another person who didn't grasp the rules, who believed a kind smile could buy entry into an establishment trading in exclusivity and power. His jaw tightened. He knew his job, and in this moment of profound uncertainty, adhering to protocol felt like the only solid ground. He prepared to deliver his usual polite but firm dismissal, the words already forming on his tongue. The tension in his chest, however, remained. The founder. Who could it have been? The rejection. Leo's heart jackhammered against his ribs, a frantic percussion echoing the furious voice that still reverberated in his skull. You turned away who? Mr. Henderson's bellow had landed like a physical blow, a concussive wave of pure, distilled wrath that left Leo's limbs rubbery. He'd botched something disastrously, though the specifics remained a blur, drowned out by the sheer decibel level of the dressing down. All he grasped was the perilous edge he now occupied, the specter of joblessness, of Henderson's renewed displeasure, coiled a frigid knot in his gut, chilling him despite the unseasonably balmy evening. His gaze flitted over the approaching figures, each one scrutinized with a desperate, laser-like focus. Flawless. That was the mandate. No more slip-ups. A lone figure detached itself from the pedestrian flow, ambling with deliberate steps toward the velvet rope. An older gentleman, perhaps in his late 60s, with a silver mane that caught the ambient shimmer of the streetlights. Leo's scrutiny intensified, sweeping over the man's attire. It wasn't the cut of the suit. For a suit, it certainly was, but the fabric itself, a subtle luster that hinted at a bygone era, a different school of tailoring. It lacked the crisp, contemporary lines Leo was accustomed to seeing ushered through the Diamond Club's hallowed entrance. The man reached the rope, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips as he surveyed the bustling street and the queue forming behind him. He carried himself with an innate gravitas, an unhurried elegance that seemed almost anachronistic amidst the eager anticipation of the waiting throng. "Excuse me, sir." Leo's voice, usually a resonant baritone of authority, now held an edge of nervousness he fought to rein in. He stepped forward, a determined set to his jaw, effectively barring the man's path. He leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowed, his frown deepening with each passing second as he assessed the stranger's ensemble. The jacket, of fine tweed, was impeccably maintained but unmistakably vintage. The trousers, a subtle check, lacked the razor-sharp crease of modern formal wear. Even the polished leather shoes, though spotless, exuded a classic, almost antique quality. "I'm afraid I can't grant you entry," Leo announced, his voice just loud enough to snag the attention of those waiting behind the rope. A ripple of murmurs snaked through the small crowd. Their eyes on him, their silent judgment, only amplified the pressure. He needed to be resolute, absolute. "The dress code is rigorously observed here, sir, and frankly, your attire doesn't quite meet our stipulations." He gestured vaguely at the man's chest, implying a broader critique than just the jacket. He wanted to be unequivocal, to leave no crack for argument, no more turning away the wrong person. He would be the most unyielding gatekeeper the Diamond Club had ever known. The older gentleman's faint smile remained undisturbed. He simply held Leo's gaze, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Not ire, not dismay, but perhaps a fleeting spark of amusement. He offered no protest, no argument concerning his dress. He merely nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible dip of his head. Then, with the same unhurried grace that had brought him to the threshold, he turned from the Diamond Club's shimmering facade. He moved toward the street with quiet dignity, melting into the stream of evening pedestrians as if he had merely paused to admire the architecture. The crowd behind the rope exchanged glances, some smirking, others looking mildly discomfited. Leo, his heart still thrumming, puffed out his chest. He had executed his duty flawlessly this time. A moment later, a sleek black car shrieked to a halt at the curb, its tires protesting the sudden stop. Mr. Henderson, his face a thunderous mask, practically launched himself from the passenger seat. He didn't even spare a glance for the waiting line, his eyes frantically scouring the street. He spotted Leo, his already enraged expression twisting further. "Where is he?" he bellowed, his voice raw with disbelief and barely contained fury. He seized Leo by the arm, his grip surprisingly vice-like. "The founder, Leo, Mr. Silas. Where did he go?" Quiet dignity. The velvet rope, a shimmering boundary under the distant streetlights, swayed with a fresh gust of wind. The line for the Diamond Club, usually a vibrant tapestry of designer attire, had thinned, a hushed anticipation now permeating the air. A few latecomers, hopeful and slightly tipsy, shuffled, their gazes flitting between Leo, the imposing bouncer, and the elderly man before him. Mr. Silas, defying the biting chill, wore a tweed jacket that seemed to drink in the light, its worn elbows silently narrating countless contemplative evenings. His hand clasped a simple wooden cane, its polished surface smoothed by years of faithful service. A ripple of whispers snaked through the queue. A young woman in a sequined top nudged her companion, stifling a giggle behind a gloved hand. "Did you catch what Leo said?" she chirped, a reedy sound. Something about a dress code violation, and looking lost. Her friend, meticulously coiffed, chuckled, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and mild disdain. Poor old bloke. Probably mistook it for his local watering hole. Mr. Silas, however, appeared untouched by their muted mockery. His gaze, a surprising sapphire hue, remained fixed on Leo's unyielding face. A subtle softening around his eyes was the sole indication he'd registered the bouncer's dismissive tone. He neither raised his voice nor flinched, from the biting wind that ruffled the few silver strands escaping his simple cap. Instead, a slow, almost imperceptible nod began. It wasn't a gesture of surrender, but rather one of quiet understanding, as if Leo's sharp words had merely affirmed a long-held private suspicion. Then, a faint smile touched Mr. Silas's lips. It was a peculiar smile, devoid of amusement or derision, but something deeper, more knowing. It held a hint of melancholy, perhaps, and a profound sense of irony, the kind of smile that suggested a lifetime of witnessing the same patterns, the same follies, repeat endlessly. He offered no retort, no argument, not even a single word of protest. His silence was not born of defeat, but of an unshakable dignity that radiated from his very core. Without a backward glance, Mr. Silas turned. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. The cane tapped softly on the pavement with each step, a steady rhythm against the city's cacophony. He walked away from the glittering entrance of the Diamond Club, away from the snickering crowd and the formidable bouncer, vanishing into the shadowy expanse of the street. A few people in line exchanged confused glances. The initial amusement had faded, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "Well, that was unexpected," remarked a woman with an elaborate updo, surprise lacing her tone. "He didn't even argue, just left." Her husband, usually quick with a sarcastic quip, remained silent, a pensive frown creasing his brow. "He seemed awfully calm," he mused, more to himself than to her, almost like he knew something we didn't. Another onlooker, a young man who had observed the scene with a detached air, felt a strange prickle of unease. There was something in the old man's quiet departure, in that knowing smile, that suggested a depth far beyond what had just transpired. It wasn't the reaction of a man denied entry. It was the reaction of a man who had chosen to walk away entirely on his own terms. The lingering chill in the air suddenly felt sharper, and the dazzling lights of the Diamond Club seemed to lose a fraction of their sparkle. A subtle shift had occurred, a tiny crack in the perfectly polished facade of the evening. The memory of Mr. Silas's quiet dignity, the faint, knowing smile, hung in the air, a silent question mark against the backdrop of the city's indifferent hum. Leo's triumph. Leo watched the older man's retreating figure, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Mr. Silas, with his impeccably tailored but slightly rumpled suit, had clearly underestimated Leo. The Diamond Club wasn't just any upscale establishment. It was the Diamond Club, and Leo, standing at 6'5" with shoulders like granite slabs, was its formidable gatekeeper. He'd seen the look of mild surprise, almost bewilderment, on the man's face when he'd firmly, but politely, denied him entry. No reservation, no entry. Simple as that. It was a rule, and Leo was a man of rules. A cool night breeze, carrying the faint scent of exhaust fumes and expensive perfume from passing cars, ruffled Leo's dark hair. He adjusted the lapels of his own impeccably tailored suit, a uniform that gave him an air of authority he relished. He'd seen countless faces come and go, some pleading, some indignant, but few as quietly accepting as Mr. Silas. That was what made this particular rejection all the more satisfying. It wasn't a shouting match, a scene, or a display of temper. It was a quiet, firm assertion of Leo's power, a testament to his unwavering resolve. He puffed out his chest, the fabric stretching taut across his broad frame, feeling a surge of importance. This wasn't just a job. It was a performance, a daily affirmation of his vital role in the city's exclusive nightlife. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows as Mr. Silas continued his slow, unhurried walk. There was no hurried stride, no frustrated stomp of his foot. Each step was measured, almost contemplative, as if he were lost in thought rather than stewing in rejection. Leo observed him, tracking his progress down the polished granite sidewalk, past the shimmering windows of designer boutiques and the discreet entrances of other exclusive venues. The man's silver hair, catching the ambient glow, seemed to shimmer for a moment before he disappeared entirely around the corner, swallowed by the urban night. Leo exhaled slowly, a long, contented sigh. Another potential disruption averted. Another night. Another display of control. The rhythmic thrum of the bass from inside the club vibrated faintly through the pavement, a constant reminder of the vibrant energy he was safeguarding. He checked his watch, the heavy metal glinting under the street lamp. Still early, the real rush hadn't even begun. He imagined the interior, the hushed clinking of crystal glasses, the soft murmur of conversations, the discreet flirtations, all unfolding under the watchful eyes of staff he managed to keep on their toes. He was the first line of defense, the filter, ensuring that only the right sort of clientele graced the plush velvet interiors of the Diamond Club. He imagined Mr. Silas now, perhaps hailing a taxi or simply continuing his stroll, nursing a bruised ego. Leo almost chuckled. It served him right, trying to walk in without so much as a phone call. The Diamond Club wasn't a public park. It had standards, a reputation forged over decades of exclusivity, and Leo was the living embodiment of those standards. His presence alone communicated a message: respect the rules, or face the impenetrable barrier. The satisfaction simmered within him, a warm, comforting sensation. Tonight felt like a victory, a small personal triumph in the grand scheme of the city's ceaseless nocturnal ballet. He was in his element, powerful, essential, and completely in control. The night was young, and Leo felt utterly invincible. The owner's arrival, the crisp night air, usually a balm for Leo's senses after a long shift, now carried a different kind of charge. He watched, a faint smirk playing on his lips, as the expensive black sedan screeched to a halt, its tires protesting against the polished cobblestones of the club's private drive. The sudden stop was aggressive, uncharacteristic of the usual smooth arrivals at the Diamond. Before the engine had even fully settled, the driver's side door burst open. Mrs. Elena emerged, a whirlwind of furious energy. Her usually impeccable dark hair, a testament to carefully chosen stylists, was slightly askew, a few strands escaping the elegant clip at her nape. Her eyes, typically sharp and assessing, blazed with an intensity Leo had rarely witnessed. She wore a tailored suit, but its severe lines couldn't contain the raw agitation radiating from her. Her face, usually a canvas of controlled composure, was flushed, a deep crimson staining her high cheekbones. She didn't bother with the usual pleasantries or even a glance at the valet who rushed to open her door. Instead, she strode with purpose, her designer heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the pavement. Leo, for the first time in hours, felt a prickle of unease. His usual impenetrable demeanor faltered slightly. He had just finished a rather satisfying exchange, a small victory in his ongoing battle against the undeserving, and was still basking in the quiet dignity of the older man he'd turned away. But Mrs. Elena's current state was unsettling. This wasn't her usual late-night inspection or a routine check-in. This was something far more urgent, far more personal. She reached the velvet rope, her gaze sweeping over the queue of hopeful patrons with an almost frantic urgency. Her eyes, usually so focused on details, seemed to blur past the faces, searching for something specific. Her hands, usually clasped or gesturing with elegant precision, were now clenched into tight fists at her sides, the knuckles white against her skin. "Leo!" Her voice, when it finally cut through the hum of the crowd, was sharp, edged with a barely contained fury. It wasn't a question, but an order, a demand for immediate attention. He straightened, his formidable presence reasserting itself, though a knot tightened in his stomach. Mrs. Elena, is everything all right? He tried to inject a note of concern into his tone, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. She ignored his question entirely, her gaze still darting wildly. Did you see an older gentleman? Tall, silver hair, wearing a dark overcoat. He would have been here, maybe 20, 30 minutes ago. Her voice rose slightly with each word, an underlying tremor revealing the depth of her distress. She didn't wait for him to process the description, her head turning from side to side as if the man might materialize from thin air. Leo's mind raced. The older man, the one he'd just so deftly dismissed. The silver hair, the dark overcoat. The description fit perfectly. A cold dread began to seep into his veins. The satisfaction he'd felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of foreboding. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Mrs. Elena's eyes finally landed on him, piercing and accusatory. There was no mistaking the raw emotion in their depths. The anger was palpable, but beneath it a desperate worry that made his stomach clench. "Well, Leo," she pressed, her voice now a low, dangerous growl. "Did you see him or not?" The air around them seemed to crackle with her impatience. The usual confident flicker in Leo's eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. He swallowed hard. The implications of this sudden, desperate inquiry were beginning to dawn on him, cold and sharp as a winter's blade. The shocking reveal. Leo leaned against the polished granite of the valet stand, a faint smirk playing on his lips as Mrs. Elena's expensive sedan screeched to a halt a few feet away. The tires chirped in protest, a stark contrast to the usual hushed arrivals at the Diamond. She emerged, a tempest in a tailored suit, her usual elegant composure replaced by a furious flush that crept up her neck. Her eyes, usually cool and assessing, were wide with a frantic energy Leo had never witnessed. "Leo!" she practically shrieked, her voice cutting through the evening's ambient hum. "Did you see an older gentleman, tall, silver hair, wearing a rather plain tweed jacket?" Her hands, usually adorned with understated jewelry, were clenched into white-knuckled fists. A jolt of unease, quick and sharp, pierced Leo's smug satisfaction. He straightened, the smirk wavering. "An older gentleman?" he repeated, stalling, the image of the stoic man in the tweed jacket flashing in his mind. "Yes, ma'am. About 20 minutes ago. He tried to get in." Mrs. Elena took a step closer, her gaze pinning him. "Tried? What do you mean, tried?" Her voice was laced with an urgency that sent a shiver down Leo's spine. He puffed out his chest slightly, attempting to regain his earlier confidence. "Well, ma'am, he wasn't exactly dressed for the Diamond. Tweed jacket, no tie. I told him our dress code is strictly enforced. No exceptions. He just turned around and left, very quietly." Leo expected a nod of approval, a commendation for upholding the club's prestigious image. He even imagined a bonus for his diligence. Instead, Mrs. Elena's face deepened to a dangerous shade of crimson. Her jaw tightened, a vein throbbing visibly in her temple. The air crackled with an intensity that made the hairs on Leo's arms stand on end. You turned him away?" Each word was spat out, sharp and venomous. "You actually turned away Mr. Silas." The name hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. A cold dread began to pool in Leo's stomach, solidifying into a knot. "Mr. Silas," he echoed, his voice barely a whisper. He'd never heard of a Mr. Silas. "Yes, Mr. Silas," she roared, her voice escalating to a pitch that drew the attention of a nearby doorman. "The man who helped me build this entire club from the ground up. The man who believed in the Diamond when no one else did. The man who is, to me, more of a father than my own." Her words were a torrent, each one a hammer blow to Leo's carefully constructed pride. Leo's face went slack, the color draining from it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He had imagined 1,000 scenarios for Mrs. Elena's reaction, but none involved this volcanic eruption of fury, or this revelation. Mr. Silas, the quiet man in the tweed jacket, the one he had dismissed with such casual disdain. He's a legend, Leo. Mrs. Elena continued, her voice now trembling with a raw pain that cut through her anger. A true visionary. And you incompetent fool, sent him packing because of a tweed jacket? Her eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, bore into him, filled with a reproach so profound it felt like a physical blow. He was coming to celebrate his 81st birthday tonight, with me. He only wears that jacket when he's feeling nostalgic. It was a gift from his late wife. The knot in Leo's stomach tightened, suffocating him. He pictured the man's calm, almost serene expression as he'd turned away. No protest, no argument. He'd simply accepted Leo's pronouncement and departed. That quiet dignity, which Leo had mistaken for meekness, now resonated as something else entirely. A profound disappointment, perhaps, or a deep-seated weariness with the superficiality of the world he had helped create. "Get in your car, Leo," Mrs. Elena commanded, her voice now dangerously low, a tremor of fury still beneath the surface. "Find him, now, and don't you dare come back without him." The weight of his mistake pressed down on him, suffocating. The smug satisfaction had evaporated, replaced by a chilling terror. Leo fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking. The once gleaming valet stand now a mocking monument to his colossal error. The implications of his actions, once a distant hum, were now a deafening roar. A deep regret. Leo felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. The smug satisfaction that had buoyed him just moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that spread through his limbs. Mrs. Elena's voice, though hushed, carried the weight of a thunderclap. Her gaze, usually sparkling with good humor, was now a storm of pain and fury, fixed on the empty space where the old man had stood. "That nobody you just dismissed, Leo," she began, her words clipped, "is Mr. Silas Thorne, and he doesn't just visit quietly because he's a harmless old man, Leo. He visits quietly because he owns a significant part of this club, a very significant part." The air around them seemed to thicken, pressing in on Leo. He watched Mrs. Elena's hands clench and unclench at her sides, her knuckles white. The silk scarf around her neck seemed to tighten with each sharp intake of breath. He could hear the distant thrum of the bass from inside the diamond, a mocking counterpoint to the sudden silence that had fallen between them. "Mr. Silas," she continued, her voice now dangerously low, "was instrumental in funding the diamond's initial launch. He's been a silent partner, a mentor, and frankly, the only reason we survived those lean early years. He prefers to keep a low profile. He comes and goes as he pleases, observing, enjoying the atmosphere without the fuss of being recognized. He values his privacy, Leo, something you just violently stripped from him." Leo's face, usually ruddy from the crisp night air, drained of all color. It felt as if an invisible hand had wrapped around his throat, squeezing the breath from his lungs. The image of the old man's calm, almost serene face flashed in his mind. The way he'd simply nodded, turned, and walked away, a picture of quiet dignity. Not a hint of the power he held. Not a flicker of anger or even annoyance. Just quiet acceptance. That acceptance now felt like a hammer blow. It wasn't defiance, it was the confidence of someone who knew the world would right itself, regardless of a petty gatekeeper's arrogance. Leo's previous certainty that he had handled a nuisance with professional firmness now shriveled into a profound, gut-wrenching shame. He had not just denied entry to a patron, he had insulted a founder, a primary investor, a man who held the diamond's very existence in his quiet, unassuming hands. The full weight of his colossal error pressed down on him. The sleek, polished facade of the diamond, the pulsating energy within, the very ground he stood on. It all owed something to Mr. Silas Thorne. And Leo, the bouncer, the gatekeeper, had thrown him out like a vagrant. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead despite the cool evening breeze. His knees felt weak, threatening to buckle beneath him. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick and unwieldy, his mouth dry. Mrs. Elena turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning the street, her expression a mix of desperate hope and mounting panic. "Which way did he go, Leo? Tell me. Immediately." Her voice was still quiet, but it commanded an absolute urgency that allowed no room for hesitation. "We have to find him before he disappears again." Leo pointed a trembling finger down the street, towards the darker, less illuminated stretch where the old man had vanished. His jaw hung slightly agape, a silent testament to the dawning terror within him. The consequences of this night, he realized with a sickening lurch, would be far more severe than a simple reprimand. He had offended the very foundation of his livelihood, the bedrock of the diamond, and the man he had offended was not one to make a fuss. But that did not mean he would forget or forgive. The regret that washed over him was a bitter, stinging tide, threatening to drown him whole. He had allowed his own inflated sense of authority to blind him, to transform him into a pompous, unthinking barrier. He had disrespected a man who deserved the utmost reverence, and in doing so, he had jeopardized everything. Mrs. Elena didn't wait for further explanation. With a sharp nod, she began to walk briskly in the direction Leo had indicated, her elegant stride purposeful, her eyes still scanning the shadows. Leo stood frozen, the harsh reality of his mistake settling like a lead weight in his soul. The night, which had begun with such routine confidence, had dissolved into a nightmare of his own making. The search for respect. The office door, a heavy slab of polished oak, slammed shut behind Mrs. Elena with a sound that reverberated through the lavish space, making the priceless art on the walls tremble. Her face, usually a canvas of cool composure, was now a storm of raw fury, a terrifying mask Leo had seldom seen. "Leo," she snarled, her voice a dangerous rumble, "I need you to locate Mr. Silas Thorne. Immediately." The air in the room grew thick, oppressive with a dread Leo couldn't quite identify, yet it settled deep in his gut like a shard of ice. "Mr. Thorne," he echoed, confusion battling a nascent unease. "The elderly gentleman from earlier? He just departed, Mrs. Elena. Indicated he had other engagements." Mrs. Elena's eyes, typically warm and discerning, narrowed into glacial slits. "You dismissed him, Leo? You turned away Mr. Silas Thorne?" Each word dripped with an incredulity that sent a chill down Leo's spine. "Do you comprehend who that man is?" Her voice climbed, splintering with a pain that startled him. "He is the genesis of the diamond, you dolt. He is our silent benefactor, our very bedrock. He is the sole reason you even draw a salary here." The world seemed to lurch. The smug satisfaction Leo had savored moments ago, his pride in his impeccable adherence to protocol, dissolved, replaced by a searing wave of mortification. He'd lectured the man on his scuffed shoes, his threadbare jacket. He'd waved him off like a bothersome insect. He'd sent the very cornerstone of their enterprise packing. "Find him, Leo," Mrs. Elena continued, her tone now a desperate plea, the fury ebbing to reveal something far more fragile. Retrieve him. Apologize. Grovel, if necessary. Should Mr. Thorne abandon the diamond due to your profound disrespect, you will never secure employment in this city again. Is that clear? Her gaze impaled him, unwavering. Your career, Leo, hangs by a single, frayed strand. Go. The sharp command propelled him from the office and through the opulent foyer. The polished marble gleamed malevolently beneath his trembling feet. The soft jazz strains from the lounge now a mocking dirge. He burst through the heavy glass doors, the cool night air striking him with the force of a physical blow. The street, usually a vibrant artery, felt eerily hushed. "Mr. Thorne!" Leo shouted, his voice hoarse, unaccustomed to such raw desperation. He scanned the receding figures, the dwindling red lights of distant vehicles. Mr. Silas Thorne! A scarlet flush of shame burned across his face. He'd prided himself on his discerning eye, his knack for separating the wheat from the chaff. And in one arrogant instant, he'd committed the cardinal sin of his professional life. He sprinted down the sidewalk, the rhythmic slap of his expensive shoes against the pavement, a stark counterpoint to the quiet grace of the old man's worn leather. He conjured Mr. Thorne's tranquil, almost serene expression as he turned to exit. No protest, no argument, just a quiet acceptance of the dismissal. That silence, Leo now grasped, wasn't resignation. It was the dignified repose of a man who held no need to trumpet his worth, a presence that resonated even in stillness. It was the quietude of a monarch disrespected by a mere gatekeeper. A bus rumbled past, its diesel fumes acrid in his nostrils. He strained to see through the grimy windows, hoping for a glimpse of that unmistakable silhouette. Nothing. The streetlights cast elongated, distorted shadows that danced ahead of him, taunting his frantic pursuit. Each pounding stride brought a fresh wave of realization. He hadn't merely refused entry. He denied dignity. He hadn't simply been rude. He'd been utterly blind to the true essence of a man. His chest ached, not solely from exertion, but from the crushing weight of his monumental blunder. He'd always believed respect was earned, yes, but he'd also implicitly believed it was bestowed based on superficiality, on outward appearances, on symbols of status. Mr. Thorne had shattered that illusion. Respect wasn't a uniform or a gleaming shoe. It was an intrinsic quality, a quiet fortitude that transcended facile judgments. "Mr. Thorne!" he bellowed again, his voice fracturing with effort and burgeoning panic. The prospect of confronting Mrs. Elena, of losing everything, spurred him onward. He rounded a corner, his breath ragged, his suit jacket flapping against his sides. The street unfurled before him, desolate. He was too late. The sheer, overwhelming emptiness of the thoroughfare mirrored the hollow void that had opened in his stomach. He had to find him. His livelihood, his reputation, and a nascent, agonizing comprehension of what true respect entailed hinged on it.